Who's ready to talk more gut and vaginal health details with the world-renowned microbiologist, Kiran Krishnan? Yay! I'm so ready for this. The last interview that I did with him, I believe it was in November of last year, so many people benefited from that one interview. Hi, hey beautiful, hi guys. I am so excited for this second interview with Kiran. You guys, I don't even know what to say. This guy is so amazing. Hi Pooja. It's just like breathtaking. I know that some of you went and followed his page and you've been seeing his videos, and I've been talking to you about it, and I made a lot of clips with him out of our last interview together, and the just knowledge bombs he dropped were like incredible, weren't they? Did you guys watch my last interview? Let me see. Hi guys. So I'm just waiting for him to pop on. I don't know if any of you had a chance to watch his last interview 2 days ago with the integrative pediatrician. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Michelle, yes, you've been following him and watching. Good. I got all of your questions down. Look at this. Hopefully I get to actually make it through all of this with him today. So, how you doing, Michelle? Hi, Jayla. Oh my goodness. How's your guys' weather today? It is so muggy. Hi, Leah. So I'm just waiting for Kiran. There he is. There he is. There he is. Here he comes.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi,
Oh my
Sarah.
gosh.
How are you?
I'm really good. How are you? It's so nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Chicago, which is, we're just starting to get into the some of the niceness that we'll have for a few weeks before it becomes
Right?
too hot, and so we're really enjoying it right now. Yeah.
Dude, I totally agree. Same here in Utah. We have very bipolar weather. It's like
Yes.
one day it'll be 80 and then at the end of the day it'll like thunderstorm. So
Right.
it's, yeah,
Exactly.
I love it. Like you never know what you're gonna get.
You
Well,
never
hey,
know.
thank you so much for coming back. I can't even
Yeah.
tell you how many people I sent, like my clients, my, people that came and were asking me all kinds of questions. I'm like, watch this interview, watch this interview. It has
Yeah.
just been like so informative to be able to share everything from our last interview with my community. So
Great.
I'm excited to dive in again. I watched your live with was it Elisa Song?
Yeah. Yes. That was super
Oh
fun.
my gosh. Okay. So that was really incredibly mind-blowing on a lot of different levels, but what stood out to me, and I'd never connected this before, was how she talked about um, antibiotics, like what in the first 6 months of life, and how that can really affect the microbiome. And I had this flashback of
Yeah.
how when I was delivering both of my kids, I was forced to be on an IV
Mm.
antibiotic because I tested positive for group strep B.
Right. Yeah.
And what really killed me is my son. I've never connected these dots. He has struggled with really severe seasonal allergies his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I was
And
like,
was he a vaginal birth or a C-section?
both vaginal. Hmm.
Vaginal. Okay. Yeah. I mean that it has an impact. There's no doubt about that because the early seeding is supposed to be heavily bifidobacterium, and in particular bifidobacterium. But if there's any use of antibiotics or if it's a C-section baby, or a number of other issues, then the baby just doesn't get high amounts of bifid infantis inoculum early on. So the way the microbiome works is that some of the first colonizers are Bif infantis. Right before they start to take over, you've got these facultative microbes that have the ability to both exist in oxygen and non-oxygen environments, right? So keep in mind that most of the gut is an oxygen-free environment. Surprisingly, because we're oxygen-based, we're carbon life forms that use oxygen, but our guts, our digestive tracts are free of oxygen. They're anaerobic areas. And so, but when a baby's born, the baby's gut is not that big. The baby's gut is full of fluid and things like that. So there's plenty of oxygen in the environment. So the earliest inoculum will start to consume all the oxygen in that environment. And then as the gut becomes anaerobic over the first few days, then you'll start to see the growth of Bif infantis. This is also part of how you start to see the baby stool change very quickly, right? Remember that like weird, super green infant stool that didn't really smell, right?
Yeah.
It was disgusting looking, but it didn't smell, right? Like they might poop everywhere and it's all over the diaper and their back and all that stuff, but it didn't really smell. Certainly not like their poop when they're a little bit older, or adult poop for that matter. And part of that reason is because there's no fermentation happening, right? They're not really fermenting anything. So they're drinking stuff, eating stuff, or drinking mostly. It's going right through them. It's becoming pasty, and then it's coming out through defecation, but it's not fermenting in the bowels because the bowels aren't yet anaerobic. And then once the bowels start shifting to becoming anaerobic with a high amount of Bif infantis, that's when you start to see the changes in the stool. You start to see more solid stools. You start to see better water absorption in the large bowel. Thereby, the stool becomes more solid, and it starts to get formed because then there's this like muscular contraction activity to push the more solid stool through. That's how you start getting these tubes and formations, and it starts to have an odor, and the odor comes from the fermentation, right? So if you have a course of antibiotics during birth, during delivery, and then sometimes shortly after as well, then it really disrupts that first inoculum, which screws up that shifting of the gut to anaerobic. And then the first bifidos, which tend to be very sensitive to antibiotics, also get screwed up in terms of their inoculation. And one of the key findings of that is the dramatic risk of asthma and allergies, right? So that is and this is also why C-section babies also have an increased risk of asthma and increased prevalence of asthma. So that is how it's all connected.
And there you go, guys. And that's why my son has seasonal allergies. Yeah, so thanks to that. I mean, and I'm gonna, I have some nieces now having babies. I'm gonna order that book and send it to him.
Yeah.
It was, oh my gosh. Like, if you guys haven't seen that interview on his page from 2 days ago, please go watch it. Yes,
I have it right
I'm
here
gonna
because I've
order.
been looking through it. It's phenomenal. She's done such a great job putting it together.
Yes. And if you order it by tomorrow, then she has all these bonus classes that we can take, and I want to do that. Yeah. So thank you so much for bringing her on. And you know what? I just want to say, like I told you in my email, like thank you for your new videos.
Oh,
Like
you're welcome.
they have been so good. Just the way you break things down, like so simply. Like I want to share every single one of your videos to my page, and then I was like, well, hang on, Sarah. Like, this isn't the Kiran and Sarah page,
No, please do. I make them purely to educate people,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So I
someone
don't
asked
have.
me if you were my husband.
I'm your Instagram husband. We could do that.
I
You know how
know,
people
right?
have like work husbands and this different.
Right?
Yes,
And I was
for
like,
sure.
why would they ask me that? I'm like, well, I do share his stuff a lot.
Well,
Yeah.
so what people may not realize is I actually have no business associated with social media, right? So I don't have any monetization. I don't make money at all off of Instagram or any of that stuff. And most of the companies I'm involved in, social media is not an important aspect of it. And so putting those kind of videos together and all that is purely for helping educate people and give them some sort of background and understanding on things so that they're better empowered to make decisions for themselves,
And
right?
it's
And
working, and you're doing a great job. And the one
thank
about the
you.
omnivore, okay?
Yes.
Like that one right there, when you were like, let's remember that we are omnivores and our teeth show us that. And I was just like, Okay, this is such a good like reminder because I feel like, and I hear you talking about this a lot, and I'm like, you probably get tired of repeating yourself, but it's so important what you're saying. So this kind of leads into, I want to bring it back to the basics
Yeah.
because a lot of people are still just so lost on the basics of like eating. Okay, like
Yes.
how do I eat? And so when you were like, remember, we're omnivores, guys. And it's like, well, what does omnivore mean, right? Like, I eat plants and animals, like
Mhm.
not just animals or, so let's just say, like, can you speak to the trends of like the high animal meat diets and how
Yeah.
this is affecting the gut and the immune system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand where these come from. And part of it, it's like an overcorrection on misinformation that has been going on for a long time, right? So for a long time, from the 70s and 80s onwards, meat has been kind of labeled as a bad thing. Beef is causing people to have heart disease, and meat is bad for you, and so on. And so then the whole world of meat alternatives came about, where people are eating soy burgers instead of real burgers, and so now they're starting to realize, okay, well, meat's not actually bad for you. Of course, the type and quality of meat matters, and then there's other risk factors where too much meat can create health problems. But there are other risk factors that drive some of those things, and so then now people are overcorrecting and going, haha, we told you meat wasn't bad for you, not, and in fact, all you should eat is meat, right? So now they're going the completely other direction, right? And at the same time, you've got vegans that are pulling in one other direction. And so to me, diet and nutrition is one of those areas in which the wellness industry starts to fall apart. And it makes us look crazy in many ways, right? Because
Yeah.
people can be so extreme with their
Yeah.
views about this.
Mhm.
What they mentioned in one of my other posts, I was writing a response to some sort of carnivore doctor or something like that, where I was like, people become activists about their dietary choices, right? So when you become an activist about your dietary choice, then you do two things. Number one is your entire identity is around that choice, right?
Mhm.
Like some of the people that were posting recently on one of the threads, on the omnivore thread, for example, are like, carnivore Matt, I'm a carnivore biker, I am a vegan runner, like their whole identity is their diet, right? Which is to me kind of crazy. Number two, you because you've made that your identity, then you are right and everybody else is wrong, right?
Mhm.
Everybody that doesn't follow your exact choices becomes completely wrong. And when you think that way, then what happens is any evidence that contradicts your belief system, you tend to ignore or push it off somehow, and then you grab at straws at little pieces of evidence that you think makes sense to validate your point, and you try to put a narrative together. And this happens with all forms of extreme diets, right? I have no dog in any of those fights, right? To me, I eat everything. I love meat. I eat plenty of meat. I love vegetables. I love fruits, nuts, roots, tubers. I eat all of it. And I eat with my microbiome in mind, right?
Mhm.
And ultimately, to me, that's what makes the most sense, because throughout the course of human evolution, we've had this very important microbiome that we've had to, support, facilitate, and grow. And that microbiome is what gives us so much of our capability. And so, if we're not eating with our microbiome in mind, then we really start to potentially cause problems. So, to go back to answer your question, if you're going super high to where you're only eating animal products, where you're only eating steaks with butter and salt, right? There are people that do that. They're that extreme. You might feel good for a period of time, right? And then the question is, well, why do you feel good? Well, okay, it may be a few different things. Number one, it may be that your system is so dysbiotic that you actually can't handle a big variety of foods, right? And so you may feel bloating, indigestion, you may feel lethargic when you eat a big variety of things. It doesn't mean those things are bad for you, it just means your system is not in the condition to do it, which means you need to get your system to the condition to do it, right? It's not avoid all those things and I'm fine, right? So that's one thing. It's maybe because you're somewhat intolerant of a lot of those foods that you really should be eating. Number two, inevitably going to a heavy meat diet means you're going caloric restriction, right? Because meat is very filling. And gram for gram, it may have less calories than lots of other sources, certainly sugars and things like that. So you're going under caloric restriction. And a lot of people feel good under caloric restriction, especially if you start losing weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great thing. Fine. Losing weight is always a good thing if you're carrying extra weight. And then number three, because you're eating a high amount of protein, there's going to be a period of time where your body adjusts and you might end up maybe even putting on more muscle, so that might give you a better feeling about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what is going to happen, no doubt about this, is that your microbiome will start to reduce in diversity. You'll start to lose some of the fermentive organisms. You'll start to lose some of the keystone species, and that will have a cost down the road, right? Even though you may feel good temporarily, you may feel good acutely, you will pay the price down the road in terms of your total resilience, your total health and wellness, and your body's ability to adapt to an ongoing and changing world. It also will affect how you age. It affects how your mitochondria function. It affects how your immune system functions, your resilience in many ways, and so on. Right. So that is something you cannot avoid. And I tell people who are carnivore, and I get it. I get why you'd want to go carnivore, especially if you eat a diverse plant-based diet and you feel like crap. They go, you know what, I'm going to go carnivore, or this favorite influencer of mine is carnivore. They understand it. They want to go for that. If you do that, fine. Get some fiber at least in your diet. Like be carnivore with some berries and some fiber. Do that at least. At least you're thinking about your microbiome to some degree. So to me, it's such a big activist place. People battle each other. You post one thing about diet and nutrition, and a million people, everybody anybody has an opinion on nutrition all of a sudden, right? And everybody's an expert. And there's a lot of like weird gotcha things, and people are. It's just so weird,
Yeah.
the omnivore thing. I think one of the things somebody had posted on there, and I think this person had Carnivore Mike or something was their name, something like that, something with carnivore in it, which means their entire identity is the diet, right? And they were like, well, what about what plants did humans eat during Ice Age, right? As if that was somehow now proof that humans don't need plants. Well, in fact, there's lots of good studies that show exactly what humans ate during Ice Age. And yes, meat was an important part of it. They ate lots of mammals, but they certainly ate plants. It's not like we were on a barren land where there was nothing growing. They still ate berries and roots and tubers and seeds and nuts, and there was vegetation and foresting and plants everywhere, right? So they pick at little straws like this, and it can be very difficult. But my advice to people always, like when you're thinking about your diet, certainly you want things that are good for you. So I think we can all agree, no matter what diet platform you're on, that we should all be removing ultra processed foods, right? That there's no real place for that in anyone's normal diet, right? So remove all the ultra processed foods as much as you can. Then remove the processed foods, right? If you can. Now, of course, it's better to get some food in and not any food at all. So if you're running, late and you just don't have time to prepare things the way you should, there may be some level of processed foods that people end up eating. Okay, but you want to try to eliminate or reduce those as much as you can. And then ultimately just eating real food, right? That's the step one for almost anyone.
Yeah.
And then if there are things you really cannot tolerate, meaning you eat even a little bit of Brussels sprouts and you feel really bloated and lethargic and all that, okay, fine. Maybe eliminate those to a certain degree and then revamp your system. It's an indication that your gut is messed up and your gut needs to be fixed. And then you want to reintroduce those foods, right? You don't want to be in a situation where you feel fine as long as you don't eat these 30 things.
Yeah. Amen to all of that. Amen. And because I was sick for 10 years from hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's. And one of the hardest things for me was I was going into like severe food intolerances. And it just seemed like year after year, I was getting sicker and I couldn't eat. And I would just stand in my kitchen and cry because I didn't know what to eat because I felt like everything hurt. and
Yep.
I would get bloated, and I would get like it just killed me to eat. And so I felt like I had to limit my diet, and so that was a really scary place for me. And so, like you said, when you're like, well, fix your system so you can bring these foods back in, like that's a really big thing for me. And so, with testing, I started repairing my hydrochloric acid, working on
Hmm.
my liver, working on my gallbladder, and all the things in my gut, especially that would help me be able to digest my food, because in reality, I wasn't becoming intolerant to foods. I was My body was breaking down and becoming so deficient,
Yeah.
I couldn't digest properly, and that's why I was having the symptoms.
Yeah.
And so, because since I have worked on my system and repaired it significantly, I've brought in beans and lentils and rice and quinoa, and all the things that were really, really, really hurting me don't anymore.
Yeah.
So I know that we have food intolerances because of just like the manufacturing and processing of like wheat,
Yeah.
and that's like the whole other topic. But there are ways to repair your body, like you're saying, so we don't
Yeah.
suffer and have to eliminate whole food groups because of those symptoms that hurt.
Totally. And
Yeah.
and that's so speaking of that, that's why one of the things I was excited when Elisa sent me her book was that the first chapter was about resilience, right?
Hmm.
And that's always been my health goal. And if anyone asks me for advice and information on health, that's what I tell them. I say, you should work towards resilience, right?
Hmm.
Resilience means you can handle lots of stuff. Your body and your system is designed to be able to handle lots of stressors and lots of good things too. And that's kind of the human condition, right?
Hmm.
We are unique in the animal kingdom in that we have been able to survive in almost every kind of climate, every kind of region on Earth, right? There's a
Hmm.
reason why there are lions only in the savannah, right? There's a reason why there are polar bears only in certain parts of the world. There's a reason why there are pachyderms only in certain parts of the world, because they've adapted to that one environment. And once you take them out of that environment, they no longer can exist or thrive. But humans have the capability because of our nomadic, in part because of our nomadic behavior, because we roamed, right? We're bipedal, we walk on our feet, we roamed. And the roaming, in part, gave us this diversification of the microbiome. And the diversification of the microbiome actually is what gives us the ability to adapt to almost any given environment, right? And if you look at the animal kingdom, what's interesting about this is you look at the animal kingdom and you look at which animals, which mammals especially, have microbiomes that are most similar to humans. It's not the animals that have the genetics that are closest to us. So if you look at our great apes relatives, which is the chimpanzee, we're about 99-ish% or somewhere around there, 95% genetic similarity to the chimpanzee, right? So we're pretty close genetically to them. And yet our microbiomes are quite a bit different. The animals that we have the most similarity to from a microbiome perspective are baboons. And the reason is because baboons are nomadic. They roam. They live in the trees for a while. They live on the ground. They travel in troops. And they're omnivores, right? They eat. They have canines and incisors, and they have masticating molars as well. So they eat vegetation. They eat nuts and seeds. They hunt. They'll also eat animals. And because of all of those behaviors, they tend to have a microbiome very similar to ours, right? And so we are adapted to a global environment because of our diverse microbiome. And if we forget to support the diversity of our microbiome, even for short-term gain, right, we will pay some sort of price down the road.
Hmm.
And that's the part that to me is a problem for me where I get concerned is it becomes disingenuous to tout a lot of short-term gains from dramatic diet changes, right? Like vegans, for example. I have friends that when some documentary came out, then everyone became vegan because of it, right? Because of the mistreating of animals and so on, right? And they felt good in the beginning, but then they started becoming severely nutritional depleted, right? Hair is falling out, teeth is becoming more brittle and so on, because they're not getting all the nutrients they need.
Yeah.
Right. And so you see those, right? There's temporary short-term gains, but there is a long-term price if you don't keep your microbiome in mind when you're eating.
Right. And so, as a coach, I use all of your testing. I use the BiomeFX the
Yeah.
gut test, the vaginal test you invented. Um, it's so amazing when I get my clients' test results back to see, with the interpretation guide and everything that goes along with this. It's never about like, oh, eliminate this food. And I tell my clients this all the time, like, I'm not here to starve you or put you in scarcity. In fact, I want to encourage you to eat more.
Yeah.
And not only are you going to eat more, but you're going to eat more kinds of food, and I really like educate them on the diversity. But like you said, with the nutrients and how their hair starts going brittle and everything, it's like, what people forget when they're removing whole entire food groups is like, did you just remove a lot of your fat soluble
Mm-hmm.
vitamins? Did
Yeah.
you just remove a lot of your water soluble vitamins? What about your minerals? Like, that's why we have the beautiful combination of all the different foods, because they bring in all different kinds of nutrients that our bodies do not make, and we have to get from the outside sources.
Yeah. That's
So,
right.
mhm,
And there's a very, very amazing example of this in the literature, right? So there was a
mhm,
study that came out, if I'm not mistaken, it came out in 2018, and this was about going gluten free, right? So the study this was published in a major gastroenterology journal.
mhm,
So they basically followed thousands of individuals who were gluten sensitive, right? And so they should be on a gluten free diet, right? Because gluten is clearly creating inflammation for these people.
mhm,
And so they followed them for the first few years after going on a gluten free diet, right?
mhm.
And what they found is in the first year and 2 years after going gluten free, their all cause mortality and their mortality from things like heart disease and all that went dramatically up, right? And you go, wait a minute, this is completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Because here's this individual, this type of food is clearly inflammatory to them, and they remove the food, and their mortality goes up, and their disease risk goes up. So, what the hell is happening,
Mhm.
right? The only explanation for that is that this is a North American study or a US based study. In the US, almost 90% of people's fiber intake comes from wheat, right? And so these individuals are taking the wheat out because, of course, they want to avoid gluten, and they're not replacing it with other fiber. Instead,
Oh.
normally they're replacing it with fats and protein, right? Because their system feels better with that,
Mhm.
right? And doing that, they're dramatically increasing their disease risk because now you've taken out an entire important macromolecule,
Yeah.
right? So this study to me was a great illustration of what the inadvertent effect is of just completely removing something, especially if you don't replace it with something else, right?
Yeah.
I totally understand removing wheat, fine, do that, right? But
But
now you have
eat
to be super conscious,
potatoes.
yeah, and go, well, okay, I got to get my roots, tubers,
Yeah.
prebiotics, cassava, a
Mhm.
quinoa, add in something else. You got to get your fiber in still, right? And just because you wanted to eliminate this one category doesn't mean you shouldn't be replacing that with something that provides you some of the same nutrients. So removing both macro and micronutrients in a dramatic fashion can have a huge devastating effect. And a lot of times when people go on these very extreme diets, that's what they're doing without knowing it, right? So
Mhm.
just because they see some influencer online is like, I only eat, I'm only keto. And keep in mind, keto, there's a time and a place for it. There's some amazing research on cancer and keto, right? There's a period where you can use keto in a very beneficial way for cancer. There's researchers doing great work on that. If I had, some sort of severe stage 3 or 4 cancer, I would absolutely consider that, right, as an option. But does that translate to regular healthy people needing to be on keto all the time, right? Probably not. So if you go on any of these extreme diets, right, whether you're going vegan, you're going carnivore, you're going keto, and you're eliminating food groups because you hear some influencer online saying how that's the most important thing you can do, but you don't have enough knowledge to know what nutrients you're inadvertently eliminating, and you're not figuring out how to replace those nutrients, you're likely getting yourself into trouble from a health perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I feel a lot of nervousness for people, right? Because they don't have the background to go, oh, I'm removing all these groups of foods. Wow, these food groups are really high in polyphenols and carotenoids and this, that, and the other. How do I get those back in my diet because they're necessary?
Yeah.
Right? So
Hmm.
that's a key part that people need to understand.
Yeah. And the side effect, right? Because people are coming in after being on keto. Like lady just signed to work with me today and she's been carnivore for 6 years. I'm kind of scared to see her test results. Like I got a lot of work on this
And
one.
she not been supplementing at all with prebiotics or anything? Wow.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun ride. So we're gonna work together for 8 months to try to
So
repair the damage.
and
But
what are the primary things she's dealing with?
everything, thyroid
Everything.
issues, severe fatigue, Epstein-Barr, HSV2, extreme hair loss, brittle nails, insomnia, mood disorders, the whole gamut, you know?
Wow. Yeah, you got to
Yeah,
do like a full micronutrient analysis and all of that stuff, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's wow. Yeah, she's. I mean, if you eat a very narrow diet like that for a period of time, you're going to be starving
yeah,
yourself of certain key nutrients. If especially if you don't have the background in knowing what to replace that you're now
yeah.
missing, right? So yeah, that's unfortunate.
So I had to actually like confront her, like you said, and be like, honey, I'm willing to work with you, but only if you're willing to change your diet. Like we
Hmm.
can't continue the carnivore only diet. And obviously I'm going to give her the nutrition support based on her test results, for what her bacteria show that they need. But yeah, it's really doing a lot of damage. And then next to that, we're seeing these severe bad bacteria, the gram-negative
Hmm.
bacteria that come along with this, like the Billify Waldsworthia and stuff, these infections, that first we have to spend all this time trying to kill these guys, right? Or like
Yeah.
suppress them and then rebuild the gut. And it's a lot of work. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. But let
It
me
is.
ask you this. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I saw I saw an article the other day and I almost died. There's this new term. Tell me if you've heard of it. It's called keto crotch.
No. What is that?
Oh my god, dude. So basically, right, like when they're only eating like high animal, like it's putting them alkaline in their vaginal biome, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically like bringing on Gardnerella and the BV and the odors and whatnot in the vagina. And I was like, okay, that actually makes sense,
Yep.
And I was like, I didn't know there was a term attached to this, but like this is a thing now, like keto crotch.
Oh, it's keto crotch. Oh my God. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought you said crunch at first.
Oh,
A
crotch.
keto crotch. Oh my God, that's
Yeah, right?
terrible.
I know. I was like, what the fuck?
I've heard of so a lot of people will get the keto fever, right, which is an
Yeah.
increase really in endotoxemia and a number of other things that occurs early on when you go full high fat
Yeah.
like that. But
So
keto crotch,
talk
wow,
about
that's amazing.
the carnivore and how it's affecting the vagina ecosystem, because that's a whole nother level. That's the keto crotch.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Because so much of the vaginal microbiome is dependent on how healthy the gut microbiome is and the gut mucosa as well. And how the immune system functions in the gut mucosa, that translates to the vaginal mucosa, right? So the way, for people to understand, you've got kind of this central command center in your gut that is dictating how the rest of the immune system throughout the body functions. And the central command center in the gut is kind of directing immune cells in other parts of the body to understand what to target, what to suppress that shouldn't be growing there, right? For example, in the sinus cavities, right? You've got lots of mucus and all that that's being produced all the time. You've got secretory IgA that kind of neutralizes lots of bacteria and fungi in that region. And then you've got immune cells also that handle any overgrowths or infections in the sinus cavities. The problem becomes when you have a messed up gut and those immune cells don't know what is friend or foe, right? And so they allow proliferation of microbes that shouldn't be proliferating. So, for example, if you get a lot of streptococcus and staphylococcus in your system because of your poor diet and lifestyle and all that, then the strep and staph start to not look like foe to your immune system in the gut, thereby in the rest of the body where you see staph and strep, it also doesn't look like foes, so your immune system doesn't necessarily go after it. And then if you get an overgrowth of staph and strep in your sinus cavities, then you have chronic sinusitis, right? That's the predominant driver of chronic sinusitis. That's one way in which a messed up gut can actually cause chronic sinusitis, or then all of that stuff from your sinuses drips down into your lungs, and then now you've got chronic upper respiratory syndrome, right? So this is how all of these things start to cascade down. The same thing occurs in the vaginal area because the mucosa in the vagina houses the microbes that live there. And in a healthy vaginal canal, it's typically one microbe, right? In most women with a healthy vaginal canal, they'll have one dominant species in the vagina. If you have a lot of strep, staph, E. coli, and a bunch of other stuff, Gardnerella and so on, you have an issue in the vaginal canal, right? You're going to have, at the least odor and discharges and all that, but it goes all the way to even messing up fertility. But all that languaging and understanding starts in the gut. And so if you're messing up your gut or you're reducing your diversity, let's say, from reducing the diversity in your diet and going super narrow, you have that increased risk of then translating the wrong information to other mucosal tissues like your vaginal canal, right? And so, and that could, and I can't say that I've seen specific research on it, but intellectually it makes sense where it could impact things like fertility and so on, right? Like if you're trying to have a baby and you're going, oh, I'm trying to get pregnant and I eat only keto or I eat only carnivore, I eat only vegan, it could have an impact on what your ability to get pregnant and carry your baby to term. Yep. So ultimately, I think we want to be as diverse as we can.
And oh my God, Kiran, you kill me. You're so amazing. I have never, I mean, I knew there was like the dots, but you just connected some massive dots for me because almost all of my clients have the chronic sinus infections.
Yeah.
That get, so they get put on the antibiotics, then they have the chronic yeast infections, and it's just one big shitstorm.
It is, yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't know that was connected to the gut. Oh my God.
Yeah, so
everything.
all of those are mucosal surfaces, right? So
Yeah.
everywhere in your body where you have mucosal surface, which keep in mind your mucosal surfaces inside your body is the biggest surface area you have. You have almost 4,000 square feet of mucosal surfaces in your body, right? That covers all the insides of your body. And it's that mucosal surface where your immune system and the microbes interact a lot. And so your whole respiratory tract, your upper, lower respiratory tract, your vaginal canal, urogenital tract, so your urethra as well, right? So now you also have risk for not only BV and yeast infections, but also UTIs, right? Yeah. Those kind of go along.
Yep.
So all of those mucosal surfaces get disrupted. And like you mentioned, one of the unfortunate consequences of that is one of the ways in treating mucosal dysfunction in terms of infection is antibiotics, right? Whether it's antibiotics for BV or UTI or sinus infection or upper respiratory bronchitis, you're using an antibiotic and the antibiotic messes up your gut even more, which messes up your mucosal surfaces even more, and the cycle just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
Right? You'll get to a point where one of the mucosal surfaces is so far gone that it becomes such a chronic issue. So in a lot of people, it's chronic sinusitis, right? Where they get 4 or 5 bad sinus infections every year.
A year,
right? Every year. And some people, it's respiratory, where they continuously get bronchitis, 4 or 5 times a year. Some people, it's bacterial vaginosis, right? Where they get BV all the time, or they get yeast infections all the time, or they get UTIs. All the time. And anytime any of those surfaces get an irritant, because they're not stable and they're not, the key word, resilient, they get infected. So people with non-resilient vaginal microbiomes, intercourse can lead to BV and UTIs, right? People with non-resilient upper respiratory or sinus cavities, you go outside, it's allergen season, pollen's floating around, that's going to cause an irritation, you're going to get a sinus infection, right? So anytime, and then what next thing that happens actually is your skin also has a mucosal-like response to it, because your skin, even though the skin surface of the skin is a strong barrier, right underneath you've got immune system response, so your skin becomes less resilient. So then when you start touching things and rubbing things and environmental things sit in your skin, you have a higher risk for getting dermatitis, eczema, rashes, redness, itchy skin, and then of course your skin ages faster too as a result of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you can hear that. Apparently a weed whacker guy just like came out my window. But yes, I do. Oh my gosh, thank you for saying all of that. Yeah, that is so connected, and one of the things that I'm constantly battling, sometimes I have my clients work with me just on their vaginal biome, depending on the symptoms, and sometimes just their gut. But after what you just said, I'm like, shit, I gotta combine this. Like it has
Mm-hmm.
to be together.
It
This is
has to be
so
together.
crucial.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think they'll have much better outcomes when you combine the two.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. All right, so we've talked a lot about food. Thank you so much for clarifying. Um, there's something that women, okay, we need to talk about drinks. Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
call drinks like prime real estate because a lot of women will live on drinks all day long, but
Yeah.
not eat. Okay,
Yes.
so the majority of my clients are coffee addicts because they're exhausted, right? And or caffeine, like coffee, energy drinks, and or
Yep.
soda. Okay, but then they're going out on the weekends here and there, having alcohol with their friends. So can you talk about how all these drinks are affecting the gut immune system, vaginal biome
Yeah.
combo?
Even and the thing is, like, even if you're drinking things with nutrients in it, which is fine, right?
Mhm.
You like, let's say you're being really good about it, and most of the drinks you're drinking throughout the day that's in your giant cup are things like greens drinks and so on,
Yeah.
right? Those are fine. So you're getting some nutrients through it. The problem with doing that in lieu of eating food is that your digestive system doesn't get the exercise it needs in breaking down solid foods, right? That is a very foundational part of being a human, is the continuous exercise for your digestive system to break down solid foods. And that's production of enzymes, that's getting your microbiome involved, that's getting all the muscles in your digestive tract involved, so the peristalsis and the churning of the food, the release of hydrochloric acid, the release of bile salts, pancreatic enzymes. All of these things are very important orchestration of what it means to be a human and exercise your digestive system, right? And so when you reduce that dramatically, because you are on what looks like a liquid diet now, all of those things will start to falter. You won't produce enzymes as much. You'll lose some of the neurological activity of peristalsis.
Wow.
So your bowels will feel a lot more uncomfortable when you do eat solid foods. You may not release as much HCl as you should. You may not release as much bile as you should. So it becomes harder to detox your system and all that. And you're not breaking down and assimilating nutrients, right? And that is a key part of energy production. And so you're really you continuously put yourself into an energy deprived mode. And then, of course, to me, the biggest issue with that is you're not providing the solid mass of stuff that your large bowel needs for fermentation,
Yeah.
right? And fermentation is one of the most important things that occurs in our system. And the reason for that is because upwards of 50% of the compounds that we utilize to be humans comes from the fermentation. It doesn't come directly from food. It doesn't come directly from nutrients, right? So if you think about things like short chain fatty acids, right? Butyrate, propionate, acetate. If you think of compounds like urolithins that are really important for mitochondrial function, right? All of those things are derived from a fermentation process that occurs in your large bowel, where your large bowel bacteria are breaking down solid foods, in particular various types of fiber, right? So you're negating so much of that. and that becomes really problematic for your system as well, right? So you really can create some sort of atrophy in your body's ability to normally digest solid food if you don't do it frequently enough, right?
Wow.
It's similar to, like, just as to give an analogy, no different than like a muscle, right? If you don't exercise a muscle enough, the adaptation would be a atrophy of that muscle. You start to lose the function, the neurological connections associated with that muscle. You start to lose the mass, the strength, and so on, right? So same thing with the food.
Wow. I had no idea that happened. Holy cow. Dang. That's really
And
serious.
yeah, and keep in mind that, so the one thing that people should really understand, right? And this is kind of a general understanding of the human condition, is our bodies are designed to try to adapt to whatever we put it through, even really bad things, right? So for this is how there's a show that exists that says, that's called My 600-Pound Life,
Mm.
right? That, like, we have enough people that have made themselves 600+ pounds, right? That we can have a show on it. And when you look at that, you go, holy cow, how is the human body still functioning at that level,
Yeah.
right? And that's because your body tries to adapt as much as it can to whatever stimuli you're giving it, right? And so if your stimuli for your digestive tract is just largely liquid, your body starts to try to adapt to a liquid-based diet, and then it starts to forego some of the capability of dealing with a solid diet, right? And so then when you finally introduce solid foods, you're going to feel like crap because your body's not adapted to it, right? Just like those individuals' bodies are not adapted to movement and exercise, right? So it's very risky for someone who's 400 or 500 pounds to do any sort of activity because their body's now adapted to sedentariness,
Yeah.
right? And it's not a good thing, but your body is trying to help you by adapting to whatever scenario you give it. So just keep that in mind. So that if you do anything that you know is not actually great for you, like for example, if you have poor sleep hygiene, right? And even I'm guilty of this, right? There's so many things that I can be doing rather than focusing on getting sleep. But I work really hard on trying to get as much sleep as I can, quality sleep, because my body can very easily adapt to multiple nights in a row of just 4 hours of sleep, right? It'll adapt. It'll give me what I need. I'll be functioning throughout the day, but I know it's not good for me, right? And so, but it'll adapt for me in order for me to function. So you want to be careful. Even though you might be able to get through the day doing a particular thing, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily good for you, and you don't want your body to adapt to that.
Yes. No. Wow. We do not want to adapt to that. Holy cow. Whew. Okay. Well, that was like a whole nother level of understanding for nutrition. Thank you for speaking to that. I think a lot of women need to hear that. That's
Yep.
huge. Okay, so for the last, first of all, for everyone that's been making comments and we haven't been answering you, sorry. If you, after I post this, you guys are more than welcome to come back in and ask all your questions because I'll be able to go in and reply. We both can go in and reply.
Yeah, and if you tag me in your question, I'll work to jump on and add a reply there too to the comment section.
Cool, thank you. So the last two questions that I want to ask are kind of for me for selfish reasons. Since I do work, you guys, if you don't know me, I am a certified transformational nutrition coach, and I do help restore people's gut, and I use all of his programs and products, and they're phenomenal, and we get amazing results. So I haven't been able to get a straight answer from any of the specialists at microbiome labs that I've worked with on this, so I wanted to ask you directly. So I don't quite understand megaviron all the way. You know, obviously a lot of my clients, as you know, they're coming in with herpes, a lot of Epstein-Barr, a lot of herpes, cytomegalovirus. So I have to do a lot of antiviral virals on like pretty much everyone I work with. So my question is, can you explain to me just what exactly is megaviron? Like, I know it's herbs and I've already like researched it and I have all the products from my rep, but can I do that with my clients on top of lysine monomer? And is it safe to be overlapping like that, or should I use it as a standalone?
Yeah, so it is safe. And the reason for that is megaviron is actually designed to deal with circulating viruses that you may be exposed to. It was designed during the pandemic, and it was designed for all the things that we would be exposed to from a respiratory perspective. The key to how it functions is really about enhancing the immune system's particular functions. One function is the monitoring system of the immune system, right? So think about how vast your body is. And I've done talks on this where I show that there's a 200,000 to 1 ratio of immune cells to microbial cells that the immune cells are trying to manage, right? Mm-hmm. So for every one immune cell you have, let's say a macrophage or dendritic cell that's trying to protect the body, you've got over 200,000 bacteria, viruses, and so on. And so there is a monitoring issue in your system where you can enhance that monitoring system by enhancing the function of macrophages and dendritic cells and so on. And so that was one of the goals in it, is to increase the monitoring system. The second part of it is when your immune system does encounter a virus or in this case, even an infectious bacteria or something, what you want is a short acute phase of reaction. So this is the non-adaptive phase of the immune response. And then you want the innate phase, as we call it. And then you want the immune system to quickly shuttle to the adaptive phase of the immune response, which is non-inflammatory, non-fever inducing, non-symptomatic, and it's also the antibody phase, right? So that shifting of the immune response from that innate immune response to the adaptive immune response requires certain support of the immune system. So megaviron helps support that as well. So it improves monitoring and it improves the shuttling of the immune response towards the adaptive, which is where you get the true protection from your immune system. So it's really an immune enhancer rather than specific to viruses, right? It works with anything that your body may be looking to go after. So that for that reason, because monolaurin and all that or lysine and all that can be very specific to the virus, it can be actually supportive to the function of those, because those are going after the specific agent, and then this is just helping your immune system shuttle the response towards the direction that it should, which is the adaptive response and so on.
Fabulous. I love it. Okay, so it would be safe to take. So say my client is on like a 6 month to a year protocol, it would be safe for them to take it the duration of the protocol?
For sure.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I needed that. And then my last question is, can you please explain the difference between the GI map test and the BiomeFX gut test?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of differences, but one of the most important ones, and the GI map will have some component of it that's PCR as well, right? So for people that don't know what PCR is, it stands for polymerase chain reaction. It is a enzymatic sequencing process that amplifies certain singular genes, right? So where this was developed was in infectious disease. This is where it's really useful. So let's say you get rushed to a hospital and you're super sick with something, and they're like, there is some virus or bacteria making her sick, but we don't know what it is. And for that reason, we don't know how to treat it, right? So let's try to figure out what is making her sick. But like any human, you pull out blood samples or sputum samples or mucus samples, you're going to have lots of viruses and bacteria and all that in there, right? So they want to try to identify particular viruses or bacteria. And so they have these gene probes, these little probes of genetic material that specifically look for specific genes on viruses or bacteria and so on to look for that particular virus or bacteria. So then they amplify the gene using this enzymatic process, and it makes it easier to see the presence of that bacterial virus, because even if there's one of those viruses there, you can amplify it to a point where you can actually read the genomics, right? So it's a way of looking for a needle in a haystack when people are sick, right, or infected with something. And it's also a relatively fast process. So if someone's really sick, you can get an answer pretty quickly, right, which is good, because then you want to get treating on that. Now, the problem with that, with using that technology in the microbiome, to map the microbiome is that you are artificially amplifying the genes of specific pathogens. So it makes the whole test, the result, look very pathogenic, right? So those are what we would refer to as a very pathogen-centric test, meaning they've picked out like, okay, 15 pathogens that we're going to look for. We're going to create gene probes for those pathogens, and every stool sample that comes through, we're going to go in there with those probes, look for even one single gene from that pathogen and amplify it to be able to read it. But what that does is you might have one cell of that pathogen sitting there, and then the gene is going to find it and amplify it, right? So it's going to look like you have a lot of that one pathogen. So it's an artificial amplification. So it can be very useful for infectious disease where you're sick and you're on death's doorstep, but it's not really great for mapping the microbiome because it's not giving you a true answer as to the relative abundance of that pathogen, right? So what tends to happen is when you do the test, you get the PCR readouts on the pathogens, it looks like everyone is severely infected with stuff, right? And then the result of seeing that is then practitioners bombard people with antimicrobials. And then because they bombard them with antimicrobials, you're hurting the rest of the microbiome as much, and you're actually putting people in more dysbiosis, right? So that's a big problem. So that's one way in which they do the test. The second part of the test is something called 16S. 16S sequencing is a low resolution sequencing. It's not the PCR. They're not amplifying certain genes, but they are using sequencing to look for microbes. The problem is at the species level, it's very low resolution, meaning there's almost 40%, less than 40% accuracy. So 60, 70% error prone in terms of calling out the specific species of organism there. So it's a probability guess as to what that organism is, right? And so now you're getting like somewhat inaccurate data. And it becomes really hard to really understand what's happening with the microbiome when you have pathogens being amplified and the rest of the microbes, you're not really seeing accurate information as to what's there, right? So now the only thing you can do with that test is you have to go and hit it with pathogens, right? You look at, I mean, I'm sure if you ran 100 people, all right, probably 95% of those people would look like they're just loaded with pathogens. And the only thing you can do at that point is just hit them with antimicrobials, right? So that's a big problem. So when we saw that, we said, okay, we need to revamp the way people look at microbiome sampling and how they do sequencing. So number one, you can't do PCR because PCR gives you artificially amplified information. You can't do the 16S because we need high accuracy at the species level, right? Because the species matters, right? If you're looking in your gut, you could have Clostridium bolte, which is a big problem, or you can have a different form of Clostridia, which is actually beneficial, right? So you want to know which version of Clostridia it is. You don't want to have an error in that read. So whole genome sequencing is a very high resolution sequencing that gives you 95, 98% accuracy on the species identification. The other thing is it tells you the relative abundance of all the organisms, right? The presence of pathogens and beneficial bacteria and all that are only important as a matter of relative abundance to one another, right? You could have pathogens in the microbiome, fine. But if their percent in the population is low, then they're not really causing you a problem. It's normal for them to be there, right? You don't need to go after them. If the beneficial bacteria outnumber them, 10-1, it doesn't matter that they're there, right? And trying to go after them may actually hurt the beneficial bacteria and allow them to grow faster, right? So that kind of accuracy is really important. Now, the other part about the bioeffects test is great is the focus on functional groups of microbes, right? So these are estrobolome, glucuronidase producing microbes, hydrogen sulfide producing microbes, ammonia producing microbes, vitamins, short chain fatty acids, all of these things, because these are the functions you want to understand about an individual's microbiome, because it's those functions that make a difference on how they feel and how their outcomes look, right? So understanding those functional groups and where they are and how prevalent they are and so on becomes really important, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, right? In terms of how people feel. So those are the fundamental differences.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for explaining that. I did experience it when I was when I hit about year 10 of my sickness.
Mm,
And I double middle fingered up both industries because I was about 10 grand in debt to doctors and got nowhere. I started pulling my own tests,
yeah.
and I did pull my own GI map. And I remember it was about 6 or 7 pages, and it was very like when you were saying that, I was like having flashbacks of like how the whole results were like this problem, infection. And I remember sitting there crying because I was like,
Hmm.
holy shit, I have all these problems, and like it was like a, whatever. And I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Because you don't really get any answers of like what, okay, you got all these
It doesn't
problems,
say.
now what. And so I remember I went to like I looked for a gut specialist to try to like interpret it and work with him. And I remember our consult, I sat down and I showed him the test results, and he's like, well, you're going to have to cut out apples, and you're going to have to cut out. And then he started naming all these sugar foods and fruits. And I was like, we're done.
Hmm.
So I left, and I just continued my pursuit to work on things myself. And then I found you and the Biome FX, and I pulled that gut test, which is 19 pages. And I found out that my gut was actually awesome. Yeah, I had some overgrowth because of antibiotics in my history, but yeah, it was like I found out I had 152 species. I know I need to work on that.
Hmm.
And it just the details of what you said, it was like um I found out that my microbiome, like I wasn't making GABA,
Hmm.
and like all these problems that the GI map doesn't even like, it just doesn't even compare. They're like two different universes.
Yeah.
And so that was, I pulled mine about 2 years ago. I've been working on it diligently. It's amazing. And so people will, DM me and be like, hey, I was working with this doctor. I got my GI map. Are you willing to look at it and work with me? And I'm like, sorry, but no, like,
Yeah.
no, like that test is, it's just, in my opinion, like you said, if it's doing good in the emergency room or it's helping them like help whatever, like on the spot acute treatments, that's cool. But for like people that really want to focus on working on their gut and having like long term, health results and being able to know the details of what is going on, the Biome FX through Microbiome Labs is the shit. It's the shit. And I just feel like the GI map needs to be phased out as far as like mapping the gut, because it's so misleading. And to hear you say it's like inaccurate too, I'm just like, oh my God, like, why does this exist still? Why are we still
It
using this?
it causes a lot of distress in people. I've had a lot of people bring me their results and go, "Oh my God, what do I do?" Because everything's red, everything's high. All the pathogens are blowing up on there, and it looks like they just have massive infections in their gut.
Mhm.
And what do you do in that case? The only thing you can do is try to treat the infection, which is hitting it with antimicrobials, antibiotics, which we know are probably not going to do much in terms of helping. It's
Yeah.
gonna, if anything else, it's possibly gonna hurt the microbiome even more. So yeah, I think proper mapping of the microbiome is really important to utilize the microbiome as a therapeutic tool, right?
Yes.
We don't want inaccurate or mapping that doesn't help you understand the microbiome.
Hmm. Yeah, the Biome FX. You guys can DM me. We can hook up and talk about all the things if you want after this. I'm gonna let him go. Thank you so much for this time once
My
again.
pleasure.
I really appreciate
Yeah,
you,
thanks for
Kiran.
inviting me, and have an amazing weekend.
Yeah.
I think it's Friday, right? Yeah, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
it's
Okay,
Friday.
good. Yes, all the days kind of blend in.
I know, right?
Yeah, but yes, and if anyone, sorry if we missed your questions. When this posts, if you add your questions in the comment section and you tag me on it, I'll make sure to come back and take a look and answer them for you. That's it's what I do, right? So,
Yeah, you're
but thank
awesome.
you so much, Sarah. Pleasure to see you again,
You too. Thank
and we'll
you
speak soon.
guys. All
Bye bye.
right, bye.